Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Stotara Sata Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Jago Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giva Govardhana ki jai. Shri Shri Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Shri Navadvip Dham ki jai. Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Shri Shri Gaurnitai ki jai. Shri Shri Krishna Balaram Giri Govardhana ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Govardhana Dare ki jai. Shama Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Narayanam Naraskricham Naram Chaivam Narotaram Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudidayat Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhakti Bhavati Naishiki. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, 6th chapter, 21st verse. Triti Vichakrame Vishwan Sasane Sashana Nashane Ube Yara Vidya Cha Vidya Cha Purushastabhya Sharaya Shriti Vichakrame Vishwan Sashananasane Ube Yara Vidya Cha Vidya Cha Purushastubhya Yashayaha Shriti, the destination of the living entities. Vichakrame, exists comprehensively. Vishvan, the all-pervading personality of Godhead. Sashana, activities of lording it over. Anashane, activities in devotional service. Ubhe, both. Yat, what is. Avidya, nescience. Cha, as well as. Vidya, factual knowledge. Cha, and. Purushaha, the Supreme Person. To, but. Ubhaya, for both of them. Ashrayaha, the Master. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. By his energies, the all-pervading personality of Godhead is thus comprehensively the Master in the activities of controlling and in devotional service. He is the ultimate Master of both nescience and factual knowledge in all situations. Responsively, by his energies, the all-pervading personality of Godhead is thus comprehensively the Master in the activities of controlling and in devotional service. He is the ultimate Master of both nescience and factual knowledge of all situations. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The word Vishvan is significant in this verse. One who travels perfectly in every field of activity is called the Purusha, or Kshetragya. These two terms, Kshetragya and Purusha, are equally applicable to both the individual self and the Supreme Self. The Lord, to the Supreme Self, the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita 13.3, the matter is explained as follows. Kshetrajyam chapimam vidhi sarve kshatreshu bharata. Kshetrajanor jnanam yajja jnanam matamama. Kshetra means the place, and the one who knows the place is called the Kshetragya. The individual self knows about his limited field of activities. But the Supreme Self, the Lord, knows about the unlimited field of activities. The individual soul knows about his own thinking, feeling, and willing activities. But the Super Soul, or the Paramatma, the Supreme Controller, being present everywhere, knows everyone's thinking, feeling, and willing activities. And as such, the individual living entity is the minute master of his personal affairs, whereas the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master of everyone's affairs, past, present, and future. Vedaham samatitani, etc. Only the ignorant person does not know this difference between the Lord and the living entities. The living entities, as distinguished from incognizant matter, may be qualitatively equal to the Lord in cognizance, but the living entity can never be equal to the Lord in full knowledge of past, present, and future. And because the living entity is partially cognizant, he is therefore sometimes forgetful of his own identity. This forgetfulness is specifically manifested in the field of Ekapad Vibhuti of the Lord, or in the material world. But in the Tripad Vibhuti field of action, or in the spiritual world, there is no forgetfulness by the living entities, who are free from all kinds of contaminations resulting from the forgetful state of existence. The material body is the symbol of the gross and subtle form of forgetfulness. Therefore, the whole atmosphere of the material world is called avidya, or nescience, whereas the whole atmosphere of the spiritual world is called vidya, or full knowledge. Vidya, or full of knowledge. There are different stages of avidya, and they are called dharma, artha, and moksha. The idea of moksha, or liberation, held by the monist in the matter of oneness of the living entity and the Lord, by ultimate merging in one, is also the last stage of materialism of forgetfulness. Knowledge of the qualitative oneness of the self and super self is partial knowledge, and ignorance also, because there is no knowledge of quantitative difference as explained above. The individual self can never be equal to the Lord in cognizance. Otherwise, he could not be placed in the state of forgetfulness. So, because there is a stage of forgetfulness of the individual selves, or the living entities, there is always a gulf of difference between the Lord and the living entity, as between the part and the whole. The part is never equal to the whole. So the conception of 100% equality of the living being with the Lord is also nescience. In the field of nescience, activities are directed toward lording it over the creation. In the material world, therefore, everyone is engaged in acquiring material opulence to lord it over the material world. Therefore, there's always clash and frustration, which are the symptoms of nescience. But in the field of knowledge, there is devotional service to the Lord, bhakti. Therefore, there is no chance of being contaminated by the influence of nescience or forgetfulness, avidya, in the liberated stage of devotional activities. The Lord is thus the proprietor of the fields of both nescience and cognition, and it remains the choice of the living entity to exist in either of the above regions. So the verse again says, by his energies, the all-pervading personality of Godhead is thus comprehensively the master in the activities of controlling and in devotional service. He is the ultimate master of both nescience and factual knowledge in all situations. In the last sentence, Prabhupada repeats, the Lord is thus the proprietor in the fields of nescience and cognition, and it remains the choice of the living entity to exist in either of the above regions. This sentence indicates that Krishna consciousness can never and is never forced upon the living entity. And Prabhupada uses the word forgetfulness several times throughout this purport. it is said that all living entities are originally Krishna conscious, and it's only due to forgetfulness that they have lost their Krishna consciousness, or they're acting in an un-Krishna conscious manner. It is said in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sajja Kabunai, that everyone is actually forgetful or asleep, and Krishna consciousness is the process of awakening the original Krishna consciousness. So the Krishna consciousness movement is a process of awakening the original consciousness. So in one sense, every person, every living being, every human being at least, is very beautiful. That person is just forgetful. And even people who exhibited very heinous and horrible activities, like murder and rape and things like that, sometimes have become devotees. People like Jagai and Madai, who were very sinful, and like Ajamil. It's described that Jagai and Madai had committed every sinful activity imaginable, and yet they became great devotees. So Krishna consciousness is an awakening process, that even people who are very sinful, like Ajamil was another one who, although he was born Brahminically, led a very sinful, grossly sinful life throughout his entire life, and yet he was given the option of being liberated at the end of his life because he chanted the name of Narayana, of the holy name of the Lord. So it is said that Krishna is the ultimate master of both nescience and factual knowledge. So Krishna, this is another way of saying that Krishna gives those who are attached to material activities the intelligence how to be very successful in those material activities. An example, a very gross example, is that of lawyers. Sometimes they defend people who are in the mafia or very sinful. I once met a lawyer. Actually, this particular man made a proposition, and he arranged for me to and another devotee to fly to his office from Los Angeles to San Diego, and he picked us up at the airport in a pink Mercedes, and he showed us, when we got to his office, he showed us that all his files were based on defending this drug smuggler. And anyway, his proposition was that if we gave him a large enough sum of money, he would ensure that we would never be arrested by the Drug Enforcement Agency. Of course, we didn't accept his offer, but we thought it was kind of amusing. And it so happened that later on, this very same man was part of a video expose of the legal profession, and he was featured as a very corrupt person. And so it's possible that people can be very expert in nescience because of the grace of Krishna. He gives them that intelligence. Everywhere we see a lot of knowledge, great universities, and full of books, in libraries full of books, and great advances in medicine and technology, and in communication, in health care. All these things are actually given by Krishna. There's an interesting thing that in insurance policies, when they have a clause that something like a hurricane or a flood is called an act of God, and those things generally aren't insured. So it kind of indicates that this great industry of insurance is an atheistic industry, and the atheistic mentality is enabled through forgetfulness of Krishna to be very successful. So there's reference in this verse to the different vibhutis, the Ekapad vibhuti and the Tripad vibhuti. And what's interesting is that the Ekapad vibhuti is only a minority. That the part of the minority in which we live. It's only 1/4 of the whole creation, and the rest, the 3/4 of the Tripad vibhuti, is the spiritual dimension of life, and it's almost impossible to conceive of. And actually, everything spiritual is difficult and almost impossible to conceive of. It is meant to be impossible to conceive of. Krishna is very, very intelligent. And it's written in the Chaitanya Bhagavat that when he appeared in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, sometimes he would tell people what they did in the past. They were unable to remember. They were very forgetful, but Lord Chaitanya was able to tell what they did when they were 3 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, on what day. And in other words, that's the supreme intelligence, the kind of intelligence that we are very unable to access. He even knows how many hairs are on our heads. Of course, some of us don't have much hair, but he knows how many hairs there are, male or female. So that kind of omniscience is attributable to Krishna only. It's not. I mean, even if we become somewhat able to remember our pasts. It's difficult to be the word omniscient means all-knowing, and it's a different kind of omniscience than that's possessed by Krishna. So when we say that Krishna is omniscient, omnipresent, and he knows everything, it's different from that of the living entity. It's a very different kind of omniscience. So this is one of the special qualities of Krishna, and one of the particular qualities of devotees in the world. All of them, devotees and non-devotees, they are basically forgetful of their original position. And our mission is to awaken them, is to awaken everybody. So we take a lot of risks in approaching all kinds of people. Rupa Raghunath knows this well. He approaches many people. We try to give them books, and sometimes, most of the time, they refuse. But there's always a risk. And there's a risk that someone might spit on us or kick us or throw things at us. There's a risk. But it's a risk that devotees are accustomed to taking, because it's a matter it's a matter of awakening the original Krishna consciousness, and you never know when it's going to awaken. The person who delivers the post could become a guru, could become a Brahmin, could become our child's guru. It's impossible to know how this awakening process occurs, when it occurs, and why it occurs, and who it occurs for. There are people who have come to Krishna consciousness from all walks of life, and all ages, and all genders, and all countries. So it's impossible to know. Therefore, the preaching can be, it's sort of like unpredictable. It's unpredictable to know who is going to be a devotee. And all of us have interesting stories about how we encountered Krishna consciousness. One devotee I know that I know of, I don't know him personally, but when he first saw the devotees, it was on Sankirtana. He actually kicked them because he was so irritated at hearing the name of the Lord and seeing people dance in ecstasy. He was irritated. And lo and behold, he became a devotee and remained a devotee, and maybe still is, for all I know, for many years. But that was the initial reaction. So it doesn't really matter what we were, where we were, or what age we are, or what gender we are, or what nationality we are, or what race we are. It really doesn't matter. And Prabhupada has made this very notion very much part of the Krishna consciousness movement. There still are a lot of people in that part of the world who, in the Asian subcontinent, who think we're not the real thing. In their private reveries, they just think that people of the United States, for example, are very corrupt and impossible to be converted. One time, Prabhupada tells that a man came to challenge him that there was a time when Christians came to India to convert people into Christianity from Hinduism. So the challenge was, what's the difference between what you are doing? You're converting these Christians and Jews and Mohammedans to Krishna consciousness. What's the difference between that and Christian missionaries creating Hindus to be Christians? That was the challenge. Prabhupada quoted many shastras that indicate that whether you're Kiratas or Hunas or whatever, and many Puranas and many different shastras stipulate that one can come from any situation and become a rabbinical person. We were never told in the very early days that we had to follow regulative principles and that things were very difficult and we had to be born as Brahmins. But there are people that think that if you're not born in a certain Brahminical type of family, that you can't become anything greater. And that it's impossible to. There are some sampradayas that think this way, and as we know, or we may not know, that it has been difficult. It has been a great fight. Even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had to fight many. There were many people that appeared to be the Vaishnavas. They had neck beads, they had malas, they had japa malas. They dressed like devotees, but there are some, I think it's 13 Apa Sampradayas. They're not true Sampradayas, but people who are masquerading as devotees. It's a very common thing. I witnessed once in India, sometime when I was on the Parikram path going around Vrindavan, someone singing in a very, very melodious baritone voice. And as I got closer, I realized that it was a man wearing a sari. And it's one of the pseudo sampradaya sects, Sahajiyas. There are many, and it's been a great fight all the way. And one of the ways in which realization is practiced is to see where people are at. And sometimes it was said that, I think it's in Luke or Matthew, that Christ said, "I have many things to say, but I'm not saying them yet, or not now." So if a person is realized, and this is, Prabhupada writes that this is called realization, that you don't say everything to everyone on the first meeting. So one thing that Prabhupada was very keen on doing was putting art or paintings in books. In fact, as far as I remember, he was prohibiting books to be distributed unless there were paintings in them, because he thought that very important, because art is a very important thing. People, if they see a painting, they're very moved by it. And even though people used to go to art museums and look at pictures, and now they go to the cinema, that's probably the most important art form these days, is cinema, movies. So being realized is not a simple thing. There was an instance, and I think Giriraj wrote about this in his book, where a man who was very dedicated to Krishna consciousness, who rebuilt the 1972 demolished temple overnight, or over the weekend anyway. He was a very talented builder, and he obtained the necessary materials, asbestos and corrugated iron and various other concrete things that were all closed because it was Saturday. And everything was shut down, but somehow or other, because of his ability and his influence and his reputation as a builder, he was able to get all these materials. And he was told, the people that bribed the police and various other people to demolish the temple, it was actually completely illegal. They got wind that this man was going to rebuild the temple. And they told him that we're going to come with 60 gundas in the night and make sure that whatever you're doing is stopped. And he said, "Well, don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't bring 60 gundas. Bring 100, because I have 102 cartridges in my rifle, and I will sit there and kill them all," or words to that effect. Anyway, the story is that this man, who was a very, very talented builder, told Prabhupada that he had to bribe people. He wanted to, after he rebuilt the temple, he wanted to build a residence for Prabhupada on the top of one of the tenant buildings. There were a group of tenants that lived in Juhu for many years. And he said, but in order to do this, I have to pay the workers 5,000 rupees, and you can call it a bribe or whatever, but it just won't get done if I don't do that. If they're not paid 5,000 rupees. And so then the next day he said, well, they're now demanding another 5,000 rupees, a total of 10,000. So Prabhupada staged a debate between the devotees present, that should we give the other 5,000 rupees or not? And this went on for hours and hours, and finally they said to Prabhupada, well, what do you think should be done? And he said, well, absolutely, I'm not going to give him another 5,000. It's not going to happen. No way is it. And the very next day, when this man came to Prabhupada and asked for the other 5,000, Prabhupada immediately agreed to give it to him. And this shows realization that sometimes a person can reverse his or her position at any moment according to the needs of the moment. There's a phrase that Prabhupada once used called loka vichara. It's translated as what people think. So someone once asked Prabhupada, what if you see a drowning man, should you save him? And Prabhupada's answer was that, well, depends. It was kind of a strange answer. Depends on who's looking and who's going to find out about all this. And I think when there was a terrorist attack on the big tall buildings, trade towers in the United States, that caused them to collapse, it was a very very widely publicized event all over the world. Many people died, and these buildings were like monoliths. They were sacred, almost sacred buildings, of great height, and they were over 100 stories high. And because it was such a big event, the GBC authorized one of its members to write a paper saying that, yes, it was a great tragedy. But from another point of view, someone might say, from a karmic point of view, everyone got what they deserved. And it's interesting that when I first went to see the Holocaust Museum in the Washington, D.C. Mall, which is a kind of horrific kind of museum showing what the Nazis did to the Jews, how millions of people died in prison camps. And I went with a young boy whose parents were devotees, and his comment was, those Jews, they really had some bad karma, didn't they? 6 million people supposedly died in the prison camps. But it was a very sad thing, and it's a very popular thing to especially for Jewish people to see in the Washington D.C. Mall. This Holocaust, it's called the Holocaust Museum. You have to pay, and you have to. When I went to see it, we had to get tickets in advance. It's a very difficult thing to see and considered to be very popular. It is very popular. So realization means to know what to say and when to say it. Once a devotee I saw talking to some new people who they were just kind of mildly interested. They had come to the temple in Berry Place, and the first question this person asked them was, "Are you vegetarians?" And they didn't know what to say. I don't think they were, but they didn't know what to say. And I thought that was kind of a not a very wise thing to say right at the beginning of someone's visit to Krishna consciousness, to find out whether they were meat eaters or not, because many meat eaters have become Krishna conscious and given up their bad habits. Many people, including myself. So I'll read the verse again and probably will stop. By his energies, the all-pervading personality of Godhead is thus comprehensively the master in the activities of controlling and in devotional service. He is the ultimate master of both nescience and factual knowledge of all situations. So, any questions or comments? Yes?
Just Bhagavad Gita verse. What's the Bhagavad Gita verse 15:15? When Krishna says he gives remembrance and forgetfulness.
Yes.
That's the symbol.
So that supports what's being said here in the Bhagavatam, that Krishna can give, he can actually, because he's God, he makes people, enables people to be sinful, and how to do it very, very cleverly, very sort of perfectly.
So Krishna is giving that forgetfulness, then the question is, I guess, you could pose a question, why? Why is he being given that and creating sinful activities? Why give that forgetfulness?
That is a good question. Why is Krishna making the forgetful people even more forgetful, or sophisticatedly forgetful. And that's a very common question that's asked. If there is God, an all good God, why is there evil in the world? It's a very common question, and it's almost an inconceivably difficult thing to answer. What I say and what I've heard said, and what Prabhupada says, is that evil is who knows what evil exists in the heart of men was a slogan in some radio program a long time ago, but that everyone wants to do this, to use their freedom in a wrong way. And in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, that's what Krishna wanted, to use his freedom in the wrong way. And Krishna had to recite the whole Bhagavad Gita in order to get him to do his duty of fighting. So it's not such an easy thing. And it's also mentioned that there's the Ekapad and the Tripad Vibhuti. There's always going to be an Ekapad Vibhuti, or a small section of the creation full of demons, full of people who are forgetful of Krishna. Always it seems like that it's one of those inconceivable philosophical concepts. There seems to be a flow. Maybe it's from the spiritual world or from somewhere into the Ekapad Vibhuti, into forgetfulness. But the point is that by taking the risk of awakening the people to remembrance of Krishna, they can be saved. They can be liberated. They can go back to the spiritual world. They can even conduct brahminical ceremonies.
If you allow me to comment, Maharaj, it could also be said that forgetfulness then for the sinful activities that occur, obviously out of character with the spiritual self, that it makes the person involved in those activities question themselves deeper, which can be stimulating to spiritual awakening.
Say that again.
Because they've been given a forgetful state to perform sinful activities, it's out of character with the intrinsic spiritual self, which we all are, which everyone is, spiritually, eternally. So connected to Krishna, so therefore that awakens some spiritual sort of like some dawning of spiritual self-reflection.
Prabhupada used the word a lot, unfortunate, that some people just have an unfortunate situation. Like the embryonic person who prays in the womb is a fortunate person who says that I'll never ever sin again because the pain is so great. And other people who are unfortunate don't pray to God, even though they're experiencing a lot of pain. So an unfortunate situation is lower than a bad situation. Just there are people who are in the Ekapad Vibhuti, and they are unfortunate. But even the unfortunate can be made fortunate by Krishna consciousness. So it's one of those inconceivable philosophical points. And that's what makes Krishna consciousness very interesting, because it ultimately is inconceivable.
It also makes the movement more valuable to exist, the fact that it has that.
I thought when I was younger that saying that there were good people and bad people was immature. Why were the North Vietnamese people bad and the South Vietnamese people good? Why were they bombing Hanoi and giving aid to Saigon? It didn't make any sense. So in a kind of New Agey way, I thought, well, that's not very mature, and everybody is in a way okay, a really good person. But then when Prabhupada's books came into existence, and we heard that there was such a thing as unfortunate, it made a lot of sense. It was a masterful way of saying that there are fortunate and unfortunate people in the world, and it's not that people are necessarily bad, but they're just unfortunate, and they can be made fortunate. But the unfortunate sector seems to always exist anyway, because that's just the nature of life. That's my understanding anyway. So I felt that when I first started reading these books, that there was something greater to know than just that there was good people and bad people, but not in a New Age way, because some people were killers and rapists and drunkards and whatnot. So I knew there was an evil thing going on, but it was difficult to assess why. But the word unfortunate helped a lot. helped a lot.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
So I think if there's anything else we can, otherwise we'll stop. Hare Krishna. Yes, one more.
Hare Krishna Raja, I was just wondering if you could give your recipe of how to always remember Krishna.
Give what?
Your recipe for always remembering Krishna.
I don't always remember Krishna, so you don't know what the method would be. I wish I were. I wish I knew. Anyway, Hare Krishna. Thank you.
HH Mukunda Goswami Maharaj ki jai.